The silence of Terah. From Why did God separate Abraham from his father? The forgotten story of Terah. Have you ever wondered why God sometimes pulls people away from the very blood that raised them? Every great story begins with a journey. But before Abraham ever set his feet toward Canaan, there was another man, forgotten, silent, almost erased from the sermons of history. His name was Terah, the father of Abram, Nahor, and Haran. We remember the son, but we rarely speak of the father. And yet, inside his quiet life lies one of the greatest divine mysteries ever told. Terah lived in Ur of the Chaldeans, a city glittering with brilliance, rich with trade, bursting with idols. The towers of Ur pierced the sky, but its people had forgotten the God who made the heavens. They bowed to stone gods that could not breathe, prayed to lights that could not hear. And there, in the middle of all that glitter and emptiness, stood Terah, a man who knew something of God, yet knelt before many gods. He was not an evil man, only a comfortable one. He had land, family, respect. He had learned how to mix reverence for the Almighty with loyalty to tradition. His heart was divided, one part longing for truth, another chained to what his fathers worshipped. And in that quiet conflict, his soul became a battlefield. The scriptures say, Terah begot Abram, Nahor, and Haran. Nothing more, nothing less. A simple record, but behind that record was the weight of unrealized destiny. Terah's life was a mirror of many believers, men and women who have heard whispers of a greater calling yet never find the courage to follow it. In the bustling streets of Ur, Terah would have looked successful. But heaven saw something unfinished. Because God had plans, not just for a son named Abram, but for an entire world that would be blessed through him. And for that plan to unfold, something had to break. A lineage had to be separated. A silence had to be confronted. So begins the forgotten story of the patriarch who almost made it, but stopped halfway. The man whose footsteps marked the road that faith itself would later complete. Terah, the father who started the journey that his son would finish. Maybe your life feels like that, stuck between Ur and Canaan, between knowing and doing, between comfort and calling. Maybe you sense that God is waiting for you to move, but fear keeps your feet planted where your ancestors stood. If so, listen closely, because Terah's silence still speaks. And it asks each of us a question: will you remain where tradition feels safe, or will you walk toward the promise that still calls your name? I will not stop halfway. I will not let comfort silence my calling. Where my fathers paused, I will continue. I will walk with God until His promise is fulfilled in me. The land of Ur. From Why did God separate Abraham from his father? The forgotten story of Terah. What if comfort isn't a blessing, but the greatest disguise of bondage? Ur, the city that reached for the heavens, yet forgot the God of heaven. It was a place of brilliance, a jewel of the ancient world. Its streets were lined with merchants from every nation, its markets overflowed with gold, spices, and carved idols polished by trembling hands. The people of Ur boasted of their knowledge, astronomy, mathematics, craftsmanship, and yet, for all their wisdom, they bowed before stars that could not save them. Temples stretched like stairways to the sky, built to honor gods that never spoke. Priests studied the movements of constellations, thinking the heavens could predict their destinies. Families offered incense to idols, hoping to buy a blessing or escape a curse. And amid all the noise of worship, heaven was silent, not because God had ceased to speak, but because no one was listening. This was the world where Terah prospered, a man who held status and honor in a culture built on deception. He sold idols, he taught his children their names, he followed the customs of his fathers. And among those children was a young man named Abram. From childhood, Abram watched the smoke rise from altars built to false gods. He saw the sacrifices, the chants, the rituals that promised peace but never delivered it. And though he obeyed his father and respected his traditions, there was a quiet stirring inside him, a question that refused to die. When the night fell over Ur, Abram would gaze upon the stars. And somewhere deep within, beyond the sound of priests and the clatter of temples, another voice whispered, not in thunder, not in fire, but in silence. It was the voice of the unseen God, calling softly to a heart that had begun to wonder if there was something more. You see, sometimes God begins his work in silence. Before he speaks to the ears, he disturbs the soul. Before he calls you out, he makes you restless where you are. And that restlessness is mercy, because it means he hasn't forgotten you. As Abram grew, so did that inner tension. He lived in the city of wealth but felt poor in spirit. He followed tradition, yet his heart longed for truth. And though he didn't yet know the God who was calling him, that God already knew his name. There is a mystery here. Sometimes, God calls us out not because of where we are, but because of what we might become if we stay. If Abram had remained in Ur, he might have inherited his father's idols instead of God's covenant. He might have gained silver and gold but lost the promise of nations. He might have built altars to false gods instead of becoming the father of faith. And the same is true today. Many people mistake stability for purpose. They stay in places that are safe but spiritually suffocating. They choose comfort over calling, and never realize that the walls of Ur, though beautiful, were also a cage. Maybe that's you. Maybe you've built a life that looks impressive but feels empty. You have everything that should satisfy you, success, approval, routine, yet something deep inside whispers, there must be more. That whisper is not your imagination. It is the same God who called Abram, the God who still calls people out of Ur. I will not be deceived by the glitter of Ur. I will not let comfort bury my calling. When God stirs my heart, I will listen. I will leave behind what is familiar to find what is divine. Terah's pain. From why did God separate Abraham from his father? The forgotten story of Terah. What if the journey of faith doesn't begin with a calling, but with a heartbreak? Before Abram's faith was tested, Terah's heart was broken. The story that birthed a nation began with a father who buried his son. The Bible tells us in Genesis 11 verse 28, Haran died before his father Terah in the land of his nativity, in Ur of the Chaldeans. That simple sentence hides a storm of pain. A father outlived his child. A dreamer watched a dream die too soon. There is no greater confusion for the human soul than when life forces you to bury what you thought would carry your name into the future. Terah had plans. He had 3 sons, Abram, Nahor, and Haran. And like any father, he dreamed that his children would multiply his legacy. But death came early. Unexpected. Unexplained. And when Haran died, something in Terah died too. The city that once shimmered with prosperity now whispered memories he could no longer bear. Every corner reminded him of what he had lost. Every altar, every idol, every family gathering echoed with absence. So Terah did what many broken souls do, he decided to leave. Genesis 11:31 says, And Terah took Abram his son, and Lot the son of Haran his son's son, and Sarai his daughter-in-law, and they went forth from Ur of the Chaldeans, to go into the land of Canaan, and they came unto Haran, and dwelt there. He began the journey that his son would finish.